Now, while the police-related deaths in Staten Island, Brooklyn, Ferguson, Missouri have certainly gotten the national attention, the nation also has been shocked here by the death of a 12-year-old by the name of Tamir Rice. Rice, and many of you may have seen this video, he was carrying a fake gun outside of a Cleveland community center. Again, 12 years of age. A person spotted him with a gun, wasn't sure as to whether the gun in fact was real, and relayed that when calling it in to the police. Well, the police then told the dispatcher that in fact here, they told the dispatcher they may have seen a kid with a gun or a person with a gun, but the gun in fact may be faked. Information was not relayed, however, to the responding officer who arrived on the scene and shot Rice right on the spot. Literally in 2 seconds flat, they pulled right up in front and they shot what turned out to be a 12-year-old kid here with a cap gun. Now, while police officials in other cases obviously have gotten unqualified defense here from PBAs and other supporting officers in Cleveland, not so much right now. It turns out that the officer in the shooting, Timothy Lehman, he had quite a personnel file. In fact, a file here that the Cleveland police detectives didn't even bother reviewing when hiring him. His file showed that he had been found emotionally unstable and unable to properly use a firearm. It also said he had difficulty following simple instruction and had trouble communicating clear thoughts. This is on a suburban police force in Ohio. One of his superiors also wrote that Lehman has a lack of maturity, indiscretion, and does not follow instructions. Okay, I want to get into a different thing. This is an egregious case here. Nobody seemingly thinks there's any defense for what the guy did. But is there ever exposure that goes beyond just the officer? In that, does the dispatcher have a responsibility to communicate a complete picture that they may have gotten, or give qualifiers like the gun may not be real? This was not what I'm about to say in evidence, but let's say somebody identified it as a kid, but they didn't tell the person that it was a young person at the time. Is there any exposure, I'll start with you, Jimmy, and then I got other questions on this, to people conveying information to a responding officer?
You have exposure for parents who allow kids to drink in their house for the ramifications that happen afterwards. Should there not be exposure for the people who just didn't look at his file to see that there was absolutely no justifiable reason to put a weapon in this individual's hands? I don't.
Well, let me start on the responding, because I can see it both ways. If somebody gets that information from a person, and they say, yeah, I don't think the gun's real, but he's got it. What if it turned out if it was real? Well, how much information, I'm asking if you guys know, are you supposed to convey, you got a former prosecutor, are you supposed to convey to responding officers so they have a complete picture of what they're going into?
You're supposed to convey everything pertinent.
There's no question about that. That's right. And instead of driving up, 3 feet away from the kid, he's alone. You drive up 15 to 20 feet away from him, you cover yourself, you can open your door, you stand behind it. There's 100 different protocols that the police could have used to have protected themselves. This poor child could have said, it's a water gun.
But here's the most important point I think that your question brings to mind. When are police departments held responsible for their hiring decisions, their failure to train, their failure to properly discipline? The standards in our circuit, the Second Circuit, for holding a department responsible are extraordinarily high. You have to prove to a moral certainty, quote unquote, a moral certainty, that failure to properly hire, properly train, properly supervise has led to the dastardly consequence. That's a very high standard to reach. Very few times do you ever reach it.
Although in this case, you got a guy who was already discharged from a prior police department and found to be unfit to be a police officer. It's not a knock on him personally, not that he's a bad guy. He's just not fit to do this job. And without even reviewing that, they hire him. Think of all the people who applied to be on that police department who would have been exemplary police officers. Instead of hiring them, they bring this guy on. And now here he is. And, talking about what Jimmy was saying before, look, there's not even enough time for him to have said, put the gun down. He just gets out and immediately shoots at the kid.
We didn't alter the video. That literally is how fast when the rolled right on the grass. In fact, there was no attempt to defuse it.
Apparently, the DOJ has already found that Cleveland has a pattern in practice
before even this case
of excessive force. So what Michael said is absolutely right. But in this case, they may well be able to establish a pattern in practice of negligent hiring, negligent training, negligent supervision, and the DOJ can coerce them into either a citywide financial settlement or systemic reforms.
Again, I want to get into, first of all, I understand how this sounds. This is a litany of problems, but this is literally the news cycle that we're in right now, not that's created in case after case, in city after city, especially with the advent now of phone cameras. Video is dictating where we are. And this next subject also focuses on the police, but nonetheless, there's a math aspect that I don't think the public knows. They look at these in isolation and they say, oh, wow, there's no, the guy got off, the police officer, Pantaleo, got off for it, whatever the case may be. But there is a cost, and it's actually borne by the taxpayers. And just use New York. I'm not even going national on this. We want to look at some of the math here. Let's look at this past year and even in the last few months. Well, the mother of 43-year-old Eric Garner, you all remember, there is Ms. She lost her son in Staten Island. That, of course, the case with the chokehold. Well, she's preparing to file a $75 million lawsuit against the city. In the wrongful death suit, it claims that the police violated Garner's civil rights. And as we know here, the Department of Justice is actually looking at this as well right now. And she claims they did it by negligently and recklessly placing him in that chokehold, which is banned by the NYPD. Claims against the New York Police Department, and it's not just the New York Police Department, but we're going to use this department as an example for this, reportedly cost the city of New York, that's you and me, the taxpayer here, $212 million just so far this year. That's not even including that particular case. I know, obviously, the Central Park case here was involved that drove up the number a little bit, but do you think if the public realized that there's an economic consequence to this as well, it would change this at all or not?
It shouldn't have to. And when you stop
but do you think it would?
It probably would, because we do things for the wrong reasons. But at the end of the day, when you stop and look at it, a lot of these officers are repeat offenders. You have one officer who can cost the city multiple millions of dollars himself just because he's been sued and has 4 or 5 civil rights judgments against him personally. So, and we continue to keep those people on the force. I don't understand.
A lot of that number is a consequence of New York City looking at certain verdicts, looking at fact patterns, and coming to conclusions about what jurors in New York City and federal and sometimes state courts are going to do. In Westchester, you just had a $40 million verdict in not a police death case, in the case of Mr. Deskovich, right, who was imprisoned that they found falsely for a number of years. So how can anybody be surprised at that number? I'm not surprised by that number.
And then
I'm not surprised either, and I live there, and I think the general consensus around the city, where you have a video showing what happened outside of Staten Island, is that an injustice occurred here. And I think New Yorkers, most residents of New York, that is a cost to this family that most New Yorkers, tax-paying New Yorkers like myself, are willing to pay to rectify that injustice under the lower standard of proof and send a message that this is not tolerable.
Jimmy,
thank you.
For me, the way that I'd like to, I've used this analogy before, and I really put a lot of qualifiers on it because I'm not comparing the two, but when you have the situation, I remember very well, member of the Catholic Church myself here, but the longer the church perpetuated and let bad actors define the vast majority of good actors, selfless people, some of the most amazing people, the member of the priesthood, the more it harmed the entire institution, it questioned faith in it and everything else for a good reason. Mm-hmm. Until an organization can see, without being defensive, that it's in their best interest to have worse defenders, not just held accountable, but not be part of the ranks, you're going to keep having this. And I don't know how that changes, but it seems to be, as we all talk about, part of the process here and the culture and whatever else. And I think now you got 2 camps of people. People saying, oh, all cops are bad, they're all out to get everything. That's not true. The vast majority aren't. But we're having these conversations in part because we have to defend actions about people that shouldn't be in that situation, that are either repeat offenders, or if they do something wrong, there shouldn't be blanket defenses by the PBA because it becomes like the boy who cries wolf.
Well, and I think that in both instances, when you have the police policing the police, when you have the church policing the church, when you have the organization and issue making these decisions, then history will consistently repeat itself because there's a protective nature, a culturally protected nature, and that is just going to continue to happen. And so you do need somebody from the outside looking in with some power, with some control, in order to affect some change.
I'm going to jump to a break. When we come back here, a lot of interesting cases, including we're going to head to the Supreme Court where justices have agreed to hear a challenge to Obamacare. Sound familiar? Well, we're going to tell you where that goes here. And yes, the man who appeared before the High Court himself will throw in his 2 cents. Yes, very well done. Thank you. We'll be right back.